and he ushers me into this little storeroom, and he wouldn't let my cameraman David go in. And this was quite scary because we're out in the middle of nowhere at this point. We're really far from like the center of Buenos Aires. We've got like nothing. Nobody knows we're there. So they sort of locked me in this room. There was like 5 or 6 of them. And they started becoming very abusive and getting right in my face. And the exorcist comes right up to me and he goes like, why have you been asking so many people about my relationship with Laura? My legs are turning to jelly at this point because I'm thinking like they could kill me here. Like I'll just be another statistic out in the middle of this like area, you know?
So what's this I hear about you losing at beer pong to an 11-year-old girl? There's a lot wrong with that particular
I was living in Argentina. Well, the thing with beer pong is, I suppose there is a skill to it. Now, firstly, it is quite an American thing. I didn't grow up playing that. The only times in my life I'd played it were...
You shouldn't grow up playing beer pong, just period.
Well, some form of throwing a ball in a cup. It's just very... We do things with our feet more in England, which I suppose is counterintuitive for a game. But, I mean, you guys got it right with all the arm movement, I think.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd want to play beer pong with feet, just because then it's like feet throwing balls in cups of beer that I then have to drink. Yeah. We got this one right. We got this one right.
You got that one right, but I didn't play it that much. And they do play it in Latin America. So the Panamanian 11-year-old or 12, I can't remember exactly how old she was, she would have had a lot more practice than me. But I do think a lot of it's down to luck. I was on some Argentine TV program. I was living out there for quite a few years. And they needed somebody during the Soccer World Cup. They needed somebody to represent England in their beer pong thing, and they were doing all the same fixtures. Like, so England played Panama in the actual World Cup, so they wanted me, and they could only find a young girl to do for Panama, and it was quite embarrassing. Yeah, I really went. I thought this can't be that hard, and the ball just went all over the place, kept hitting the sides of the cups, the edges, and everywhere. And she won, and there was that thing when everyone was so excited for her because she was. No one wanted me to win anyway. But losing was still very embarrassing. So it was just one of those embarrassing moments.
I take it you didn't really play with beer, or is it just like it's Argentina, 11-year-olds can drink, it's fine, especially
I don't even remember what was it. It might have just been empty cups, But what do you say to people then? Pong, because that's just like the old arcade game, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really not beer pong, but I guess it's it could be like sparkling water pong. The part of the challenge is you continually are drinking during the game, which is, the reason that it actually is so hard after like the first round. But I guess if you're just playing an 11-year-old, I understand they needed to bend the rules a little bit for the fact that they had an actual child playing, which seems grossly irresponsible, but now makes more sense. You've had quite an adventurous life, living abroad, being the butt of nationwide jokes, so not just losing to beer pong, but tell me about this joke you made that ended up getting you laughed at for like the next year and a half or so.
Yeah, so this was a few years previous to that, and previous to the beer pong experience. I was on TV in Argentina, live TV, like their most popular evening show, and I was making a documentary at the time for Fusion of Univision in the States, which went to HBO as well, about infidelity. And so I went on this TV show because I got in Well, actually, I'll go back a bit. I spoke about it on a radio show. It was this cool radio show they've got in Argentina. It's the most popular one. And it's this show where people call in because they want to cheat on their spouse. So you'll call up and you'll say like,
because they want to cheat on their spouse.
Yeah.
So it's like they're trying to hook you up. Is that the...
Yeah.
Yikes.
Yeah. So you'll call up and say like, I want to hook up with my friend's mum or whatever, and they'll put them through to it on the show. And then on the show, you've got to say 3 questions. You've got to ask 3 questions before saying like the catchphrase of the radio show. So you just say like to the friend's mum, you're like, "Hey, how you doing?" And she's like, "Yeah, I'm okay." "Oh, what are you up to today?" "I'm going shopping," that, and then you say this thing, I can't even remember what the catchphrase was, but it's like, "Are you up for it?" It's that kind of thing in Spanish.
Oh, yeah.
And they say yes
like,
or
are you
no.
DTF kind of phrase, but in Spanish?
It's exactly that, yeah. So
okay.
I was on this show to sort of document it for the video I was making about cheating, about infidelity, and how I thought there was more of it in Argentina. Maybe, I didn't even know. It was just a bit of fun, really.
So you weren't trying to bang your friend's mom. You were just there as a journalist.
No, not in that particular occasion. And so I, it so happened that the person who was being interviewed by them before me was Viggo Mortensen, the Lord of the Rings actor, Danish American guy, because he grew up in Argentina, which like nobody knows, but he's like Argentine. He speaks with a proper Buenos Aires accent. So he's on this radio show, and he really laid into me when they asked him about me. He was saying, "Oh, who's this stupid English guy coming in here making a film about cheating? Oh, the English probably cheat more." Anyway, because of that, because it's Viggo Mortensen, such a big name, it became a big thing, and I had to go on all these TV shows to talk about it, which was great publicity for the documentary we were making. So I went on this show, and I thought it was a big popular show, and I thought that they were all going to be nice to me and go, "Oh, who's this English guy coming?" You know, I forgot that obviously with the Falklands, there's a bit of animosity. The British
Falklands being a war that was a long time ago between the UK and Argentina, so they still hate you guys, apparently.
Yeah, 1980s, early 80s, Thatcher and all that stuff. So they were very hostile to me. And they were saying, "Oh, you're making a thing about cheating. Don't they cheat in England? Why don't they? What is England so good? What about David Beckham? He cheated. What about Princess Diana?" And I was like, "Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, you're right. It's just a bit of fun, you know." And they said, "What, you know, haven't you ever cheated? What, don't you even like sex?" And I said, "Oh, I don't know. I've never tried it." As a joke, right? And there was just a bit of silence for a second, and then they moved on to like the next topic. And then every time I spoke, I didn't know this at the time. From then on, they had a little lower thirds banner under my name that said like Andrew Gold, the ultimate English virgin. And I didn't even know. So I'm just sort of talking like a complete plonker, like with this thing below me saying that. And yeah, for years afterwards, I'd walk down the street in Buenos Aires and people would be like, "Oh, it's the Virgin." And, you know, people at my girlfriend's work would say, "Your boyfriend's the Virgin guy." And it just didn't stop. It just went on and on for about 7 years, this Virgin thing, because of a stupid joke I made.
That's great. 7 years is a long time to be the butt of a joke. By the way, Ian, we're going to have to throw that. We're definitely going to throw a lower third. Ian, let me get a lower third for Andrew that says the ultimate English virgin. You don't have to keep it for the whole show, but it at least needs to flash up there a few times for the next few minutes anyways. But the reason I'm having you on is not because of your beer pong skills or your international virgin status, but because you do these deep dives on some pretty wild stories, frankly. You got exorcists, some kind of crazy activists, even pedophiles, which, by the way, ballsy, gutsy move to cover that. I was listening to your podcast episode with this pedophile, and I thought you even said, "Oh, there's going to be people upset at me." And I thought, yeah, this is one where you've got to be very careful. Like, goes without saying that you're not glorifying it, but you have to circle, highlight, underline the fact that you are not condoning or kind of allowing that to go unchecked. And the documentaries you make are really fascinating because they expose a lot of stuff about belief and human psychology, which is right in the wheelhouse of the show and in the sphere of interest for our listeners. So let's, by way of just sort of cracking open this menagerie of weird stuff that you've covered, tell me about this Exorcist, because this was the first thing you sent me. And I'll admit, when you sent me this few line email being like, "I covered an exorcism," I was like, "This is garbage. I'm going to delete it. No, let me watch this video." And sure enough, I see this guy who is performing what looks to be exorcisms. And of course, it's never what it seems, is it?
No. Well, it's a really difficult one, I guess, as a journalist, because you go into these documentaries and you're thinking the whole time, I need to be neutral, right? That's what a journalist does. You can't go in there with preconceptions.
That's what I've been doing wrong. Yeah.
Well, it's impossible, isn't it? You can't. And this was one where I thought, well, what is neutral? Because neutral would suggest that I'm giving credence to the possibility that this man is extracting demons from people's bodies. And there are a surprising amount of people who believe that. No doubt many who are listening to this right now. And I don't. I simply don't. So it's very hard for me to be totally neutral. And that's an accusation that was labeled at me after making it. I went in and tried to just be open-minded to the fact that he wasn't knowingly betraying people's trust, that he might really believe in his own powers. And so he is an exorcist out in the suburbs of Argentina. It's really quite an impoverished area with relatively little education and that kind of thing. So there's not much access to mental health facilities or knowledge about it. So he's got a huge following, a huge media outlet. You go to his church and there are posters of the film The Exorcist and other supernatural films with his face superimposed onto the main characters.
That's a little cringe, right? That's like...
Yeah.
It's a little, you think, I'm a serious exorcist. I don't believe in this movie stuff. It discredits the whole profession. That's what you'd be thinking if you believed your own nonsense. You would think, right? Like, you would think, oh, it's like bounty hunters don't like Dog the Bounty Hunter because they think he's a bit of a clown. You know who I'm talking about? I don't know if they have that over there. Yeah, so they're like, this isn't a real bounty hunter. He's just a TV guy. It's a bit of a reality show gig. Like, it's not a thing that makes us all look good as an industry. This guy's like leaning into it the other way. And he's like, oh yeah, I've seen kids, their head didn't turn around once. It turned around 7 times. That's the kind of demons I'm up for. Let me post my face on this movie poster, not tongue in cheek at all. Somehow.
That's it. We were shocked when we saw that. And then we go in and he's playing the music, Tubular Bells from the Exorcist film during his mass. So I think he just thought, you know what, I'm going to go full in on this. If I'm going to do it, I'm going to really go for it and get sensationalist and get people to come in who are excited by the movies. And the thing is, exorcism only really works in the way they want it to if the person being exorcised has seen either those movies or has seen, adverts or little clips.
Oh,
they know how to react. Yeah.
Right, because otherwise they're like, when do I stop and let the demon go? Or do I just keep going? And like, do I writhe around or do I just scream? Do I bite, scratch, or do I just lay there? You're right. You really have to know how to play. It's like wrestling, right? Professional wrestling. You have to know that when the guy stomps his foot and hits his fist towards you, that you're supposed to pretend that you got hit in the face. You can't just be like, that's weird. You didn't make contact. You want to try that again? Oh, I'm supposed to jump up when you lift me up in the air. And I'm supposed to pretend like I'm really hurt. Okay, I got it now, right? Like it's like that. You have to be in on the joke.
Yeah, and we all know wrestlers or fans of wrestling who take it so seriously that they get to the point where they sort of, on some level, believe that it's real. And you'll know that if you ever ask a wrestler whether it's real or not, because they go completely berserk at you for even suggesting it might not be. So you do have to get to a state of believing it's real. These people who are often young, and in this Exorcist case, young women, very vulnerable, and they've got things like OCD, anorexia, bulimia, schizophrenia is a common one. So all these sort of mental conditions that resemble in some way how you might expect a demon to take hold of you. Your body is doing things and your mind is doing things that you don't want it to do. That's a very scary thought. And when you're surrounded by people who are saying to you, like, you've got 2 choices. You either go to a psychiatrist who's going to talk to you for like 10 years and maybe you might get slightly better, because that's where we're at, really. I mean, it's hard to treat mental illnesses. It's a lot of work. Or you've got someone going like, oh, but haven't you heard about this exorcist fella? He'll just take you for 1 hour and do a thing on you, get a demon out. And your mind is going to go towards that, the confirmation bias. You'll only listen to that one and you're going to go, well, it's obviously a demon. So these people, he's basically he goes around taking women out of a psychiatric ward who are suffering with things
literally
like
taking them out of a hospital.
They're allowed to, there's a particular one that I went to go and see because his assistant, we find out during the film, who's called Laura, she had schizophrenia and was basically in a mental institution, in a psychiatric ward for her entire adolescence. And as soon as she came to the end of the adolescence, she got to an age where she's allowed to check herself out. And the exorcist got her from there and did an exorcism on her. It's called El Exorcismo de Laura, the Exorcism of Laura. On YouTube, you can find it, and it's absolutely.
We'll link it in the show notes.
Yeah, I'm giving him like marketing and stuff.
Yeah, go ahead and give this guy a bunch of Google AdWords money. No, I mean, look, it is interesting to watch. You can just watch your documentary, which I assume he doesn't get paid for. That's probably we'll link to that in the show notes. Don't give this Yutz con man guy any Google AdSense money. And by the way, one note on the wrestling is incredibly athletic. The athleticism is very real. The performance aspects are very real. These guys are really, really badass, strong, fit performers. I don't want people to be like, oh, Jordan thinks that wrestling's a joke. The whole industry, it's like Cirque du Soleil. It's very, very, very impressive. It's just they're not really smashing each other's spines over their knee, at least not on purpose. That part is acting, right? So I don't mean to me. Before we get 1,000 emails about how wrestling is a real thing and I should step in the ring with Stone Cold Steve Austin and tell him that it's not real. I get that that element is real. The pain part is also somewhat real, but they're also not trying to kill each other like it looks. Anyway,
isn't it it's a sad indictment of the world and how we all are that you have to say that, because you didn't say that they were not impressive people, but I agree, you do have to now state it in case people want to misinterpret, don't they?
Yeah, or they're just really, really into wrestling and they're like, I can't believe that you don't think this is real. And they're going to, mostly, it's not that they're going to be mad. Someone's going to take a lot of time to explain to me how it's real, and I don't want them to waste their time. I have friends who are semi-pro and actual pro wrestlers. I know that these guys are beasts, right?
Yeah.
That's like, it's like the equivalent of saying, oh, you're only a Division I college level football player. You're not a real football player. It's like, no, you're a real football player just because, it's like the difference between the NFL. Just because you're not an MMA fighter, but you're a wrestler, doesn't mean that you're not like tough and impressive and great. I always try and note these things because it's not just people get offended. It's my audience is great. Someone's going to spend like 30 minutes writing an email that I don't really need to read because I already know.
Yeah.
And it's mostly that.
I get that. You'll get a lot of letters from people who believe in exorcisms. I've been getting them for years.
I don't know how many people write me if you think exorcism is real. I'm not even sure how many, although in 250,000 plus whatever people who listen to this, there's going to be a few, but I don't think it's probably that many.
Okay.
Maybe I'll be surprised by the amount of people that believe that demons possessing people are real. I hope not. It seems obviously fake, right?
Okay. Yeah, I think it'll be more on your YouTube page than people listening to the audio.
That's for sure. The YouTube comments are sewage, and I never really read them. I have an intern that does that. But yeah, poor intern is like psychologically dead. Speaking of, maybe they need an exorcism after handling some of the comments that I've seen on YouTube.
Yeah.
So this guy goes and grabs, and I say that sort of, tongue in cheek, he grabs people from the psych ward, and he's doing this. But a lot of it, to be fair, some of that is placebo effect, right? Like he does an exorcism, and they're like, I am cured, because some of them believe that at least for a while, or am I giving them too much credit?
No. It's absolutely the case, and that was where you want to make a documentary interesting, right? You don't want to go in and say like, okay, this guy's obviously a fraud. Oh, he was a fraud, and by the way, he is a fraud. But the interesting part is, well, people did get better. People do improve. People and of course, placebo, suggestion, hypnosis. These things do work. It's just that they don't deal with the core issue. Now, the thing is, some people do have just temporary lapses of mental health, right? There's particularly adolescence. It's such a difficult age. So there are people who just sort of do need that sort of kick, and they can get out of it. Mm-hmm. Relatively few. I mean, most people, they've got real mental health issues, but some people need that sort of kick, and they get up, and then they sort of get to an age, they're 20, 21 by the time, other people, they'll be better for like a year, 2 years, 3 years, and then it all starts to fall apart again. So it's a temporary fix. But these people, as soon as the exorcisms were done, they were like, wow, I feel amazing. Like everything's better. Like my OCD is gone. My bulimia is gone. I'm going to start eating now. I'm going to start everything. And it's like, all right, slow down. And every time a few months later or a year later, they're back to square one, unfortunately. But it does.
So you followed up with some of the people, and you're like, hey, are you still cured? And they're like, no, I'm back in the hospital.
That's it. Yeah, so and it took longer than we thought. So I was going back and checking a few months later, and then a few months after that, and I was like, oh my God, they're not going to fit in with the narrative that I'm trying to do here. Oh no, they're still better.
I might be wrong. Oh wait, nope, they're not better anymore. Like just the timeline wasn't stretched out enough.
Yeah, it took about a year and a bit. I went back to Argentina, went to see how they all were, and it was 3 women, and they were all back to square one. They were bad again.
A year though was a long time, but I'm guessing if they went in for like another exorcism, it might not then last a year. It might last like 6 months, and then the next one's 3 months, and then pretty soon they need it every week, or it stops working entirely. Is that kind of because I'm thinking if I just needed an exorcism one afternoon a year to not have an eating disorder or serious depression or OCD, I mean, that's kind of a fair trade, even if it's total bullshit, right?
Yeah. Well, like I was saying, particularly for adolescents who are probably going to get better in a couple of years anyway, and that sort of gets them through that stage. So exorcism isn't all bad. It's sort of, but if in the way that it's right for the wrong reasons, or it's wrong for the right reasons.
Yeah, well, of course,
it's backwards, isn't it? But I mean, so one person did say, "Oh God, he's a fraud," blah blah blah, and then another woman I spoke to said, "Yeah, he's awful. I hate him," because she kept going back, over the months. And it's exactly as you said, she wanted to go back more and more. And then the exorcist got frustrated with her and started saying like, look, there's something you're not doing right. You're obviously wrong and all this stuff.
Yeah. I mean, you always blame the victim when your bullshit doesn't work. That's how cons work, right? It's like if you didn't believe hard enough. Well, okay, now it's never like, oh, there's no such thing as an exorcism. Psych, right? You can't do that. So
he wouldn't say that, no. But this particular woman was like, so I was like, oh great, now she's going to turn to like therapy and stuff like that. How fantastic. And then she said, so what I'm doing is I'm seeing a new priest who's going to be doing multiple exorcisms on me every week. And I was like, oh, congratulations.
for just 3 times the price, for I just have to not go to school anymore and I can pay for it. It sounds, this is a stretch, but it's a little bit like multi-level marketing. You get people who do these MLMs and like some people go, wow, that was not good. It was a scam. I can't believe I fell for that, lesson learned. But a huge number of them go, yeah, you know what? It turns out that this was kind of a scam. And I go, oh, thank God. And then they go, I'm doing this other thing now. And I'm like, no, it's a multi-level. This is another MLM. Yeah. And they're like, yeah, the other one didn't work because da-da-da-da, but this one works better. It's a different product and it's a better structure. And I'm like, you're out of the frying pan into the fire. You're the same belief problem here. It's the same issue. You're just on to the next. It's almost like an abusive relationship. That guy was really bad for me. He used to hit me and treat me poorly. Doesn't the new guy do the same thing? Yeah, but it's a little bit different.
Yeah.
Well, okay,
yeah,
how?
well,
And but it's not different. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's exactly the same kind of thing. People will fall for things over and over again, and it doesn't even necessarily mean they're not intelligent. It's just like a flaw in their reasoning. Yeah.
It's a flaw in the reasoning, and that's kind of what I wanted to talk about a little bit here. The documentary was interesting, right? Because in the beginning, you're not really sure if he believes in what he's doing. There's no such thing as an exorcism. So we kind of start on the whole page of like, well, this is wrong, but like, is everyone delusional or just, is he like kind of in on it? And then after a while, you realize he is a 2-bit con man pulling a ruse and taking his victims for the ride. But he's also not, surprise, surprise, kind of a terrible person. Like, didn't he threaten you? There's a time where he brings you into a closet. What happened in the closet?
Well, so yeah, he started to get a bit tired with my line of questioning because I started to ask more about the young women that he was around. This one particular one who was his assistant, who he had exorcised. I was asking, where were her parents? She was early 20s at this point, and he's sort of mid 50s, and she'd been there for quite a few years at that point. I said, where are the parents? And it's like they've moved abroad or something like that, which is unusual for Argentinians, but they've gone off somewhere. And this woman, Laura. And I was asking a few little questions here and there. And at one point, I was talking to another journalist who goes to speak to The Exorcist all the time. And he's like the link between The Exorcist there and all the newspapers in Argentina, this particular journalist. And he didn't like me being on his turf. So he basically told The Exorcist that I had asked about Laura and him and said, why do they kiss each other? Which I hadn't seen. So I didn't know any of this.
That's interesting. Did he make that up, or did he go, I know this is going to be a trigger point for him and it's true?
Yeah, I think that's what
it was, huh?
I think so. Ooh, yeah. So
weird.
I went to this mass where it was a big mass. There are loads of people fainting everywhere outside. And I'm talking about thousands of people in the suburbs of Argentina. They're out in the church. The church is packed. This is pre-corona time. They're out onto the street. The streets are like shut down. There are so many thousands of people like going berserk. They're all like falling on the floor. Church. Yeah. So I turned up there one night, just expecting to just sort of talk to some of the people who are being exorcised and all this stuff, and help perform an exorcism. I got to do them, not believing in it, but just like, okay, this is how it works. And he's not there, and the crowd are going like crazy. They're going like, where is it? It's getting towards midnight now. And then this Laura comes out, and she says, Andrew, can you just come backstage? And I'm like, oh, what's this about? Okay, I don't know what's going on. So I go backstage, and he ushers me into this little storeroom, like between a closet and a storeroom, and he wouldn't let my cameraman David go in. And this was quite scary because we're out in the middle of nowhere at this point. We're really far from like the center of Buenos Aires. We've got like nothing. Nobody knows we're there. I sold this later to the BBC, but I made it just off my own back, just me and my friend David. So we had no protection. We had no security, nothing. It's just the two of us there. And another friend of ours who came as like an assistant. So they sort of locked me in this room. There was like 5 or 6 of them, and they started becoming very abusive and getting right in my face. And the exorcist comes right up to me and he goes like, why have you been asking so many people about my relationship with Laura? And I was like, oh, And I was nervous. My legs are turning to jelly at this point because I'm thinking like they could kill me here. Like I'll just be another statistic out in the middle of this like area, you know. And I was like, oh, you know, it's just interesting that you found her and you've helped her, haven't you? And you've made everything better and all this stuff, you know. And he goes, but why did you say that we kiss on the lips? And I was like, oh, I didn't say that. You and then the other guy comes forward, the journalist. He goes, yes, you did. And then other people came forward going, yeah, you asked me that as well. I had never asked that. I didn't even, it didn't even come into my mind.
That's interesting. They ganged up on you for this. It's so weird.
Yeah. Yeah. They really laid into me. My cameraman trying to get in the room, and he's like, you know, banging on the door. They're keeping him out. I didn't even think about it at this time, but at the time, sorry, but I had a microphone still on my lapel.
Yeah.
So it was recording everything. And to be honest, you know, he ends up screaming and screaming, and he's making me call him like, yes, I'm like saying yes, like sí. And he's going like, yes, father. And I'm like, sí, padre. And he's like, I'm a bishop. You talk to me like a bit. I'm like, yes, sí, obispo. Yeah. Yes, bishop. All this mad stuff. And it went on for like hours. In the film itself, we've got like 5-6 minutes of that. Like it's all kicking off. Eventually, he sort of just lets us go, and he goes off to his mass with his thousands and thousands of people. And me and David, we are just like shaking, you know, thinking, God, we're going to die. We've got to get out of here.
I mean, there's thousands of people, and if he's like, these are demons, they're going to tear you to shreds. You know, they're going to tear you to absolute shreds, literally.
And he was saying things like that. He was saying the devil in the house tonight. That's why I'm late, that kind of thing. David and he starts filming because you've got to keep filming. He's filming me then. He didn't get the video footage of me inside, of course, when I was being shouted at, but we got it all on audio. And he starts sort of filming me walk out. And I'm having to like walk over like bodies and bodies on the floor in these little corridors, squeezing over and around people. They're all like foaming at the mouth, and they're looking at me like, you know, and the priest had said something to them all about something like about the Falklands as well. He's going, look, they're British. They took the Falklands. So people are looking at us a bit like, oh my God, we didn't know what was going to happen. We get outside eventually. It took so long to squeeze past all these bodies, and squeezing past everyone on the street again. And eventually we sort of go towards like a dirt road, hoping that like a taxi will come. And then David says to me, oh, you know what? I had the cap on the camera the whole time that we were walking out. And I was like, what do you mean? You need, okay, can we just go? And he was like, he's like a proper director. And he's going, no, we can't leave here without showing you leaving. We already didn't have you inside the closet, right? So what are we going to show for the end of the film? You've got nothing. So I was like, I'm not going back in there. And he's like, you are. So we had to go back in. So we go back up the street, climb over about 1,000 bodies and all that stuff, and then turn around, and David starts filming me from the back, and I had to walk out again. Just the most
You're
bonkers
so
experience.
lucky he didn't see you coming back and be like, okay, that's the last straw, man.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
You're
we knew that.
So lucky.
Yeah. We
Good
worked on it.
God.
We worked on that film for like months of our life, you know, and it had to be right. And the thing is, without him going mental like that at the end, we had an okay film, you know? And I wasn't.
No, that really did
entity.
make it. It made it because he was so batshit crazy at the end. You were just like, okay, not only are you a fraud, but you're an aggressive sort of sociopath as well, from the sound of it. Yeah. And it really did. He really did sort of like do the exact opposite of what he probably intended on doing. Like he was like, I'm going to scare them. They're never going to show this. Meanwhile, it's like, look at this crazy fool we got on camera. You're never going to believe this. BBC was like, I wasn't really going to buy it, but now I got my checkbook out because of that mental breakdown that this dude has.
Oh yeah,
at the end in the last 5 minutes of the documentary.
100%. And we didn't realize that till we were sort of the next day. You know, David and I were talking. We thought, wait, did we record that bit when I was in the room? You know, it was all like that. Have we got that? And we listened back to it, and you can't. You know, now we're no longer scared at this point. We're just listening to the edit, and we were just like giggling and laughing. And no, so that he made the film, you know, and he was livid when it went out in the end. You know, he sent us some very angry emails, but you know, what can you do?
Yeah, I mean, this is a guy who probably doesn't really want to attract that much. Like he wants to be famous in his little province, but the last thing he wants, I mean, it's a developed country, right? There's a district attorney or whatever equivalent somewhere in Buenos Aires who's probably like, you know, this is a good guy to get off. I could make my career getting this guy off the map and putting him in prison for defrauding all of these people. Like, he wants attention insofar as that attention is marketing. But he doesn't want negative attention insofar as it's obvious that he is raking poor and indigenous and rural people out, over the coals in the name of what? The Catholic Church, which is probably also not super thrilled about
Lutheran.
him. Lutheran. Okay. Is there, by the way, did you end up calling anyone who's like a real bishop? Because obviously I'm guessing he's a fake bishop. Like the whole thing's fake, right? He's not licensed.
Well, it's very
or trained
complicated because what is in my mind, I'm an atheist and I respect everybody else's, so I think all of it's sort of fake, and so it just feels like different levels of fakery, just to me personally. And so we did, I emailed like the Argentine Lutheran whatever, and they said they didn't know who he was, and then I emailed like an American one. And then they said they did know who he was and that he had like turned up for an exam, and it was something confusing like that. It's all a bit odd. So he was something or other, but I don't know how hard it is to take that exam and become a Lutheran exorcist anyway.
Okay, of course. Look, I understand that you don't believe in the church, the doctrine of the church, and that's fine. But aside from all of that, there's still kind of like I don't know about Freemasonry or anything like that, but I can't just walk around being like, yeah, I'm a Freemason. Are you? Are you on our email list? Or whatever. No. And if you say that you're a rabbi, someone can go, oh, in what shul, or then what sort of like. Belief aside, there's still a hierarchical organization that has to say you're allowed to do whatever it is you're doing in the name of our church. I assume. Right? Otherwise, what's the Pope doing? The guy, like, there's a whole structure for this whole thing. Yeah, maybe we don't go there, but there's a whole structure for this whole thing where it seems like somebody would have a vested interest in being like, oh, this is a scammer who's literally using the name of our church to con people out of money. Because the dude's making bank. That has to be the key. Anybody who has thousands of followers who are there on the floor writhing around and paying him, even if they're paying him $5 for an exorcism, and it's probably way more than that. How much was it? Did you get a price quote? Is there a price list in the front?
He's very slippery about it. So he always insists whenever anyone asks that they're totally free. He's like, it's the Lord's work, it's all free. But he has a shop, and the shop sells stuff like, sunflower oil or whatever, in tiny little, vials of sunflower oil, which would cost like, 10 cents or less. And he'll sell them for like £10 each. And they're supposed to cure...
10 British pounds. So what is that, like $15 or something like that?
Yeah, $13, $14 or whatever. And so, everybody's sort of... You come for the exorcism, everybody's coming to watch, and then you stay for the shop, and you stay for all the... It's a clever setup they've got. It's smart, It's horrible, but it's smart.
Yeah, like I can't help it if people buy 13 magical T-shirts at our museum gift shop. The museum's free. What are you complaining about, right? But you need this. I assume you need the sunflower oil and the holy water and all this other stuff to keep the demons away from you for the period after your exorcism, right? So you're really spending like, even if you're only spending $13, you're probably spending way more at this shop. These are people that maybe make that kind of whatever they're spending in a few weeks or even a month, depending on how rural this area really is. So he's making a lot of money. He has a very vested interest in keeping the scam going. And at the end of the documentary, it's pretty clear that him and this like 20-year-old girl are romantically involved. He's probably he's minimum he's kind of like 3 times her age or something, or almost.
Yeah, he's taking her. We found pictures after like snooping through Facebooks and everything. We found these pictures that had been put up of him with Laura on holiday, several different holidays in like Madrid and places like that. And again, for someone from this part of the world to be holidaying in Madrid, in Europe and stuff, that's like, it's almost unheard of for people from that sort of area, that part of Buenos Aires. So he's making good money. And I don't know why he's taking her on these holidays. And, it's all a bit, it's fishy.
Yeah, it's self-explanatory that it's sketchy and that he's a fraud. So the rest of you kind of then have this presumption that he's up to no good, kind of all around 360. He's the like plot twist. He was the demon the whole time.
No, he thinks I'm the demon, and we sort of juxtapose a bit of him saying that about me being the devil in his house and that kind of thing. And also I can't say he's a fraud because the BBC lawyers advised me against ever actually saying he is a fraud. So it's possible he believes in what he does, and I don't really know. But there you go. Not that he doesn't speak English, so it doesn't matter.
Right, I'll say it. He's a fraud, and that's just my opinion, man. I've never met the guy. You've lived in a lot of different places. You speak a lot of different languages. I mean, I rarely meet people that speak, 5 languages? That's great. Wait, is it 5? French, Spanish, German, Portuguese? Am I missing anything besides English?
Well, here's the thing. Yeah, it's a bit sneaky because I phrase it as I learned to speak 5 languages, and one of those is English.
I mean, that's right. So you're like letting people assume that you're at the same level potentially with all of these, but really,
Well, also that there's a sixth one. It's like I've learned to speak 5. They went, well, you've already got English. What are the other 5?
I see.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Clever. As if 5 languages is something to sneeze at, and you're like need to be tricky to layer one in. Why does speaking the foreign language help other people underestimate you? You kind of talked about that with me pre-show. And Louis Theroux, love that guy, right? People who don't know who he is a journalist as well, who he's kind of like this nerdy English guy that just stumbling around, doesn't know what he's doing, ends up in a Scientology camp or a cult. It does work well for him, but is it the accent or is it the fact that he's like a 6'5", weighs, 110 pounds soaking wet, nerdy looking dude who just kind of is good at bumbling into things or making it look like he's doing that? Or is it the language?
Yeah, I've watched him a lot closely because I grew up, wanting to do what he does, and that's part of why I do what I do. And he says he's just being himself, but he's half American. His dad is Paul Theroux, who is a famous American travel writer. His cousin is Justin Theroux, who's was married to Jennifer Aniston. So he knows the American culture very, very well. He learned through Michael Moore. He worked with Michael Moore on TV Nation. So that's how he got his start. So he's very aware of the subtle communication between sort of Americans and Brits, and that when he walks into this room with, a Nazi, he goes and meets a neo-Nazi, and the neo-Nazi would probably be used to maybe an aggressive interviewer or something. And Louis comes in and he doesn't judge, although he probably is in his head, and just says, "Oh, hello." And it's like, oh, that's not what the Nazi guy expected. And he gets them to sort of be themselves. And you do see their humanity through that, but then they also let their bad side slip out as well. So that's what Louis does, which is brilliant. And he doesn't do too many documentaries in non-English speaking countries. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to learn a few of these languages, Spanish, so I could do South American documentaries. That's where there's loads of interesting things, South America. German, because I was looking into pedophiles over there, and French, I just love the language, and Portuguese, Brazil, it's crazy, Brazil. So when you go over there, just like Louis with his English accent seeming a bit twee and quaint to American ears, I know that when I'm talking to the Exorcist at the very beginning of the film, for example, the Exorcist, I'm making fun of him, and I'm saying to him like, "So, how many vampires do you know?" And just ridiculous things. And I wouldn't be able to get away with that in England, probably not even in America, because they would know I'm making fun of them. But because I'm sort of speaking almost broken Spanish, they can hear I'm sort of a foreigner. They're treating me as this sort of naive, innocent guy who couldn't possibly have an ulterior motive. So it does give me that advantage, this is similar to British American thing, but even more, I think.
It's interesting because you'd think it might almost be the opposite. Like, dang, this dude's Portuguese is pretty good. Maybe he's not a total dumbass that I can fool with my corny fake exorcism routine, right?
Yeah,
but it's really...
So my Portuguese or my Spanish is not as good as the local Spanish or Portuguese, so I'm always going to sound a bit stupider.
Yeah, that's good. I think now I'm like, this is why people like it when I speak to them in a foreign language, because I seem even dumber than I actually am. That is endearing. Yes, that is endearing. There's something to that. I like that. Okay, interesting. I'm going to have to make sure that I keep that in mind, and I don't want to get too good at these languages I'm studying. You know what I mean? I don't want to lose that advantage. Hey, if you like what you're hearing and seeing, check out the Jordan Harbinger Show podcast feed. There's a lot more just like this. You can find the Jordan Harbinger Show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Now, back to the show. Tell me about the crazy baby lady. This one was, you spent a long time learning from people about belief and this woman, I don't want to dive too deep into her story. Essentially, she's like this anti-abortion activist. But she's complex in many ways, more complex than you might think. And I'm assuming you came to the same conclusion.
Yeah, I got a bit maybe frustrated with the Exorcist film in that I wasn't able to be this objective journalist, So I went into the abortion one trying to be as objective as possible. I'm a man, so, some people would say that's not my debate to have, my fight to have, whatever. and I should say, put my cards down on the table. I do lean towards the pro-choice side myself, but I totally understand and respect both sides. And it was just really interesting meeting this woman who just, as soon as I saw her, she's in Argentina, people calling her the crazy baby lady. I was like, right, she's got to be in the next documentary. Documentaries about things like abortion are usually a little bit more serious and worthy and not the kind of things I make. I like to make quite sensationalist, entertaining stuff. I just really
A little
enjoy that.
whimsical. Is that the right word
Yeah,
for it? Maybe not.
well, as well, yeah.
Yeah.
They are throwbacks to, you don't meet many people like the Exorcist nowadays in at least in Europe, and fewer and fewer in the US maybe. And the crazy baby lady, she's a little bit like a Westboro Baptist Church kind of character, just so eccentric, so And I thought I've got to get into her head. So it took months and months to get her on board because she's not very trusting. Because a lot of pro-choice people, send her photos of their aborted fetuses and stuff like that to annoy her and stuff like that. But eventually she said yes, and she took me on the school run with her kids to pick up her kids, and she made us dinner and stuff like that. And she was just lovely. She was so nice to us. But then the next day, I would see her in the news again outside an abortion clinic or a clinic where screaming at young women who are very vulnerable and in a position where they don't know what to do with their lives. And she's like screaming at them, throwing like plastic fetuses at them. And I'm like, how do I put that woman together with the woman that I was with yesterday who's making me lunch and whatever? And I saw her a little bit like, we all have an aunt or a grandmother or a father or brother who just has different opinions to us. It made me really think about belief. And I thought, does she really, really in her heart of hearts think that a 1 day old fetus, as in the conception was the day before, does she really think that that is killing a life? Or is it something deeper? Is she concerned maybe about losing her conservative way of life against, a current of progressives who she sees as holding different ideals to her? So it gets so complicated. And I think it always with these sort of culture war debates, it goes far beyond the actual issue at hand. It's not necessarily about choice and it's about one conservative elite bourgeoisie who doesn't want to lose that status, and another sort of progressive younger normally demographic who wants to have more control and equality. And it's so complicated, but it just made me think like she doesn't think that she's doing evil. She doesn't go to these abortion clinics thinking I'm going to be horrible today by screaming at people. So and then you think about anything in life, apart from psychopaths, does anyone do things knowing that it's bad and horrible? It's really complicated. So that was a huge learning curve for me, and I've tried to sort of be as objective as possible in journalism, because that's a dying art, objectivity in journalism. It's all about activism nowadays.
Yeah, you're not wrong. I think she was especially complex because, as you uncovered later or you disclosed later in the documentary, her father was like, you're gonna have to correct the record here. Her father was some sort of accomplice, right-hand man to a fascist leader who had actually murdered thousands of leftist people, or people who were his political enemies that he said are leftist, which whether that's true or not. And then he stole their children and sold them to people that were a part of his sort of inner circle or agreed with his political beliefs. So this guy's like Hitler adjacent. And then his right-hand man, his, pseudo Goebbels or whatever, or Himmler, is her dad. And now she's just this fervent conservative, but you can't really be a fascist in today's Argentina, at least not so openly. So she just like takes this one little element of that regime maybe, and then turns it up to 11 and just becomes the crazy baby lady.
Yeah. It's hard to know what's going on in her mind. Yeah, you're right. Her father was the lawyer to Videla, who was a dictator. I think it was the 80s, who, as you say, murdered people and disappeared their babies. So in Argentina, even now, every now and then they will reunite a baby with like their original grandmother or their mother or something like that, and it will be cause for national celebration. You should see this stuff. I'm sure you can find it on YouTube, like the moments that they're reunited, and it's like bittersweet and devastatingly emotional. But the whole country celebrates these moments, and her family is very well known over there and sort of very connected. And she was part of that, I suppose. I mean, at the same time, it's not her fault she was born
She was a
into that.
child, right? Or a teenager
Yeah.
at most. So it's hard to
Yeah, yeah.
blame her. But her father was obviously a capital POS,
Sure.
right? Like her father was a horrible person who knowingly destroyed tens of thousands of lives, or was an
Quite, yeah.
accomplice there too.
It appears to be the case, but I don't know, him personally. I'm very careful now. You see, I'm being careful. I don't want
You
to
have
even
to
a
be.
person
I don't
who
have to be
helped
that careful.
disappear.
You know,
No, I know.
Sue me and we'll get the evidence out on the record. I'll happily do
Yeah.
discovery and see if your father was a fascist POS who murdered people. Go ahead, send me all your documents.
Man, it's just, you know what it is. What's hard is I spent so much time with her, and because I had to ask her those exact questions, I had to say, is it not hypocritical for you to be the face of the pro-life campaign, given you come from the family almost directly responsible for, disappearing so many children,
Yeah, and
so many
adults for that
babies.
matter. Like you
Yeah.
were, murder. You think fetus murder is bad? Try murdering 30,000 fully grown
Sure.
adults and then stealing their children, which is what your dad was helping
Yeah,
Videla do.
but maybe that's
just-
why she does what she does. Maybe she's in some
Maybe.
twisted way,
Yeah, it's interesting. She's an interesting figure. What does it say about belief and the mind? Right? You mentioned that you learn a lot about the human mind and belief, and people talk about the need for better critical thinking, which I do all the time. I talk to a lot of people about critical thinking. I love it. It's a core element of the show. But the real core skill here really is skepticism, so that we don't end up having our brains take us on an emotional ride in the first place. It's just that I don't put the word skepticism in the intro to the show because people confuse that with cynicism and for other reasons as well. We want to mitigate the emotional response and the cognitive bias. But what is it? What did you learn, or what do you feel people should learn from this particular story or these stories that you present?
Well, she's pretty smart, right? And critical thinking. So I think back to someone I had on my on my podcast called David Robson, who wrote The Intelligence Trap, a book that came out, I suppose, last year. And it's all about how the smartest people we know often make the biggest mistakes. And he looks into people like Einstein, for example, who did, whatever in his later years made a lot of mistakes. But then the big one for me was the writer of Sherlock Holmes. Can't think of his name right now. What's his name?
This might be a good guy for the show too, if you liked the book.
Oh yeah, he's really good. Arthur Conan Doyle was the writer of Sherlock Holmes.
Oh, yeah.
David Robson wrote The Intelligence Trap. But Arthur Conan Doyle, he believed in fairies. Now, Arthur Conan Doyle, at a time, by the way, where nobody did believe in fairies, and he
Right,
wrote
okay.
Sherlock Holmes, the master of deduction, which you could say isn't just a synonym for critical thinking. He's the master of critical thinking, of being able to think in a logical, rational way. He invented that character. He must be a genius himself, Arthur Conan Doyle. And yet he believed in fairies because he saw a child that did a prank. There was a couple of 15-year-old girls in I don't know when it was, the 30s or something, in the UK, who put up a picture of fairies. And he was like, well, it's clearly true. And where they had put a pin through their belly to just put the picture up, he thought that was a belly button. And he was like, oh, it's proof that fairies can have children. And this is how Arthur Conan Doyle fell out with Houdini, who was his best friend at the time. Who was more of a logical thinker, I suppose. So if the master of critical thinking can lead us to fairies and fairies having children and procreating, that sort of put me in a place where I thought, okay, critical thinking is not enough. I mean, the crazy baby lady is super smart. She's really, really smart. And she's come to a totally different conclusion to what I've come to and what many of us have come to with regards to pro-choice and pro-life, right? So where does critical thinking, how often do you see on Twitter people are saying, oh, we need to make critical thinking, more of that. And they're saying something bonkers. And you're like, well,
of course. Yeah, all the time.
Whose critical thinking are we doing? So things are very subjective. Things are very complicated, I think. And I think this is just me, and I might be totally wrong in this, but what I've learned from interviewing all these people is just to try not to judge too much and to try not to go too far one way or the other and to stay reasonably grounded. I think that's all you can do, and accept that you're probably wrong about a lot of stuff. That's all we can do.
Let's talk about, here's a phrase I never thought I would utter on this show. Let's talk about pedophiles.
Sure.
Not many people are covering this, at least not in depth, and certainly not in the way that you're doing it, because it is the taboo is super strong. It's a repulsive topic. As a father, I have a gut reaction, and I don't think I could have done this myself and remained objective in any way. Tell me about this, because it really is It really is such an. I don't want to say fascinating and interesting, but I guess it really is. I mean, it truly is. It's also really disgusting. Just so people are clear on this.
Yeah, it's another one. It's like, because I deal with controversial subjects, I'm sort of drawn to them. I'm drawn to the darkness. I'm fascinated by things that we're told don't talk about that. And I'm like, since I was a kid, I was, why don't talk about it? What's the problem with talking? Some people would argue, by talking about it, you're enabling it or whatever. So you're right to put out that sort of disclaimer. And I would echo it by saying like, yeah, of course, like it's a really tricky subject. It's really taboo. And you and I would never ever defend any adult touching a. You have to go into this subject by saying that, like, this is not. I'm not about to defend them. I'm actually just interviewing them. I moved to Berlin, and I was thinking, what can I do next? I've done exorcism, I've done abortion, and it so happens that Berlin has the world's only clinic for pedophiles that doesn't ever report them to authorities. So the clinic basically lets these people who they know could offend children, lets them back onto the street without, say, telling the police. The flip side of that is a lot more people actually voluntarily go to the clinic because they know they're not going to be reported. So it's a really complicated one, and people want to sort of shut their ears to it, and people don't want to talk about it. But the fact is that in the US right now, I think it was 1 in 9 girls are sexually abused. And that's not even including, other kinds of abuse, neglect and physical whatever. 1 in 9 girls sexually abused. That is tens of millions of women, and men it's slightly less, but it's still a lot of people. You're talking about tens and tens of millions of people in the US.
That's horrible. That's horrifying.
And what do? We just sort of sit there and go like, well, let's not talk about pedophilia because that makes us feel bad. And it's like, come on, if you want to stop criminals, if you want to stop murderers and stuff, you look at the murderers, you try to understand them. So I went to this clinic and I started talking to the doctors. And over the months after that, they gradually started introducing me to some of the patients. It took ages to get access to them and to earn their trust to actually meet them. So yeah, I ended up meeting loads and loads of different, or they're pedophiles. That's what they are. Even now I skirt around the word because the word has so much power now.
It's creepy. It's a creepy word too. I mean, there's everything about it is disgusting.
Yeah,
really.
You can't think of a creepier one really. Which I guess again it drew me to the subject, but it was difficult. The first guy I met called Max. It's not his real name. They don't give me their real names, and he said to me, yeah, I can meet you today. Come down to this address. So I go down to the address and it turns out it's a public swimming pool. And I'm like, that is weird. Because by that, I should add, all the people I met are supposedly non-offenders who have graduated from this program in Berlin. So these are supposed to be very, very well-behaved guys. And I turn up to interview him in the pool or whatever, outside the swimming pool. And he's there, and he hadn't told me this. He's there with 3 young girls. 11, 12 years old. Yeah. So I was petrified, firstly at the whole situation that's going on, but also on a selfish level, like, what the hell am I doing here? Am I an accessory to something? So I spoke to him
what happens if something happens and it's like, well, I was there with Andrew Gold, and you're like, I was interviewing him. Well, you must know something about it. Didn't it strike you as strange that a grown man was there with 3 young girls? Yeah, it did. That was the point of the interview. Yeah, that's so weird. I don't even know if I can handle that, seriously.
Man, I had to be very careful. And, it was a weird thing, actually. I didn't expect this to happen, because I'm very emotionally stable. And I mean stable in the sense that I don't get overwhelmed too easily. But after I spoke to him, he told me he was babysitting the girls and that the mother was aware of his condition and just fully trusted him.
I don't freaking believe that. Not for a minute. What mother? I mean, no.
Yeah, I know. But you know what? I met her and it's true. And she is somebody who's an extreme leftist, and she believes that these people are given a hard time. She believes him. She trusts him. She's known him for a few years. And she said, you can take my kids swimming. And the thing is, I get that idea of wanting to trust people. Just because you are, you're attracted to maybe women of your own age, right? Doesn't mean you go and attack them. So I get that concept.
That's true. But women my own age can consent also.
No, exactly.
Children cannot.
This is the thing. So, and he's obviously getting some sort of pleasure from taking them swimming as well. So it's just so inappropriate. It's so out of order. And I went across to the other side of the street. I left quite quickly. I straight away emailed the clinic just to sort of say like, hey, I've seen this happen. This doesn't seem right. What's going on? Surely you've told him he's not supposed to be doing this. And I sat down after doing that. I sat down in this park and I just sort of wept. It was such a strange emotion. I didn't expect it took hold of me. It's never happened in my life apart from that one moment. I just sort of broke down in a park, sort of shaking. Someone came over, are you okay? And I was like, oh, I'm fine. I obviously can't tell them what I've just witnessed, and I went and spoke to the clinic and they said, look, there's nothing we can do. We don't have his actual real details. And for all we know, he's not offending. Anyway, it was a traumatic.
I understand.
Yeah.
That's traumatizing for you to be around. I'm hearing it secondhand. It's It's minor. There's a minor trauma in me hearing about it because I'm sitting there thinking like, yeah, you're right. Okay, there's women around me. I'm attracted to. I don't go and attack them. But the difference is children. If I'm around a woman, she's like, maybe Jordan's attracted to me. Okay, she's familiar with that situation. She's an attractive woman. I'm 40. She's probably in her 30s or 40s or whatever, or 50s, whatever. This is a familiar situation which she knows how to handle. An 11-year-old child has no idea what is going on in this other person's head. They've never experienced that before. And it just reminds me, the fact that this guy and this dumb-ass mother thinks that that's okay, it's just like saying, you're a heroin addict. And I'm like, oh, you know what? I have all this heroin. Can you hold on to it? Don't do any of it, though. That would be bad for you. And this is my heroin. You need to hang on to it. It's very important. I got to get it to a medical patient. And you go, no problem. I am a heroin addict, but I'm not going to do your heroin. Okay, great. I'll be back in 3 weeks. The idea that I would come back and expect you to have that drug sitting there on your dresser that you looked at it every day, and for that to be completely untouched is ludicrous and irresponsible. And I would never expect anyone to do that. With your own children, I just can't even get close to wrapping my head around this. Yeah, talk about being blinded by your politics. How freaking stupid are you?
Well, you're spot on, and that's a really good point about the blinded thing. So, I met a lot of different patients, and a lot of them were really, really well-meaning people who were, as far as I know, of course, I can only believe what they tell me. Were well behaved, and the clinicians I spoke to they believe the vast majority of pedophiles, they make up 1% of the male population, which is a lot when you think about it. It's a lot of people.
That's a huge ass number of people. Yes, that's ridiculous.
Larger than the army.
Gym. Yeah, look, if you're at a crowded gym, one of the people in there is a pedophile.
That's right.
Just statistically speaking.
Your listeners, my listeners, there will be people among them, and I don't say this as a dig to anyone. There will be people who are listening now who will recognize this in themselves. Now, the vast majority never offend, and that's a relief because you wouldn't it's wrong. The issue is. So there are 3 types of pedophiles. There are the types who are basically psychopathic, and they're going to do what they do anyway. We can't really stop them. We can try. You've got the type that would never offend. That's most of them. These are normal guys who unfortunately have this condition. They're never going to offend. Don't worry about them. So those are 2 types. Don't worry about them. The problem is the middle. The ones in the middle who are tempted and you talk about believe your own politics. The problem with all of us not talking about it, for anyone still listening going like, I don't want to talk about this. The problem is that the only people who do talk about it is them. And these people get together in communities and they tell each other, it's not a problem if you babysit a bunch of kids. They can't be allowed, they need to be disavowed of that notion. And the only way that's going to happen is if we start to talk a little bit more openly. And that doesn't mean accepting what they do. It means criticizing what they do. But at least we're talking. At least we're saying, okay, what should somebody who might be listening now, what should they do? Well, if they're in Germany, they can go and get help from a therapist who will disavow them of these cognitive biases. If they're in the States and they go to a therapist and say this, they'll be reported to the police. If they're in Australia, same thing. UK, same thing. And
so by doing this reporting, we've basically ensured that people who want to go, dude, I got this weird ass problem. They literally have nowhere else to go except for online, where people are like, yeah, here's how you get away with this, or worse, right?
Yeah. I did a podcast recently, an episode with a geneticist, totally different subject, but it's Catherine Page Harden, she had a big argument with Sam Harris as well about genetics and stuff. But she's just written a book about eugenics, and the reason I mention it is because it's similarly controversial. And she made the same point. She said, if we can't talk about eugenics. And she doesn't mean she believes in eugenics, which is the concept that, certain races are better than others. But she says, because it's so taboo, nobody talks about it. So the only people who know about eugenics are white supremacists in forums, all discussing it and using their cognitive bias to twist it to their own, reasoning. And that happens with any taboo group of people. If you make something taboo, you force them underground. So what the clinicians say, there are 3 risk factors that they teach these pedophiles who come in. And you got to remember, like, these are people who are willingly coming in. There are bad people who don't come in. The ones who are willingly coming in, they want help, and they
they know that there's something wrong with them, right?
Oh yeah,
yeah. Like in terms of them being an anomaly and possibly dangerous.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they go in.
The sociopath's not going to go. They're going to go. I'm not going to go to a therapist. I like being a horrible person who victimizes other people. Right. That's them. And then there's people who are unaware of it. But as soon as it creeps up to consciousness, we want them to have somewhere to go. I can reluctantly get behind that. Right.
Exactly. And you know what, it is hard because a lot of people listening to this, they haven't even thought about this stuff before, right? So it's very hard. And I have to, I need to constantly remind myself that I've been dealing with it for 2 years now as I've been investigating it. So I have become a little, not exactly desensitized, but yeah, compared to the beginning when I was weeping in a park, that's what it takes. But so what they've said, these clinicians, the 3 risk factors for these people who might offend. One of them is being around children, right? That sounds pretty obvious, but you'd be amazed because that episode of my podcast with a pedophile it was episode 6, a guy called Silas.
I listened to it last night.
Yeah, so he, as you'll recall, he was saying to me, like, he needs to be around children and it will help him. And I said, what are you talking about? Yeah. If you're further away from them, you can't touch them. And he wouldn't, that's how strong the cognitive bias is with him. He thought that being nearer to them makes him less dangerous somehow. So that's one of the things. The second thing was getting drunk or taking drugs. That, of course, makes them more likely to offend. And the third thing is something that they can't control, but we can. That's stigmatization, right? That doesn't mean that you can't criticize, it's so complicated, but basically the clinic where they go to in Berlin keeps getting graffitied with hang the pedos, hang the pedophiles and stuff like that. And, we know with criminals, we know with any kind of criminal in prisons and stuff, if you make them feel more part of society, then they're less likely to offend. So it just comes down to this, like, do we want to react emotionally and angry and show everybody how anti-pedophile we are, which should just be obvious, right? It should just be obvious that we're all anti-pedophile. But okay, do we want to just show that, or do we actually want to stop children being abused? And if we do
you're
that,
right.
Yeah, it's just about talking about it a little bit more openly and not accepting even a morsel of like adult child touching or anything. Never, because that does. The statistics on that and how it ruins a child's life are just like, absolute. They're just, it ruins any child's life if anything like that happens to them. And these people need to learn that.
Yeah, I mean, this guy Silas from the podcast, this pedo, he did say, "Oh, I would never do that because I know it harms the child so much." And he's like, "But I love children," which was a creepy sort of thing to hear, because even though that's coming. But what was really weird for me, man, was he's like, "Oh, I love making friends with children and playing with children, and children love when I play with them because it's really." And I'm thinking, what kind of adult man? Like, I have a 2-year-old child. I play with my son, obviously. We play in the sandbox and we like wrestle and stuff like that, and I throw a ball back and forth with him. I would not, for at least not for longer than a few minutes, really be that interested in playing with somebody else's kid. It's my kid, so it's fun. If it's my kid and other kids, it's fun. But I have no interest in like going and playing soccer or going swimming with a bunch of 10-year-olds. That doesn't even remotely.
It would be a chore.
It would be a chore. It would be an actual chore. I'd be babysitting, and it wouldn't be the relationship that I have with these people, and I put that in air quotes, would be so. There'd be nothing stimulating and interesting in any way at all. It would be rather irritating to have to deal with that. Even if my kid was there, I'd be like, all right, I'm spending time with my kid, watching him swim. Anybody else, the rest of it, it's literally just how much am I getting paid per hour to watch these kids freaking swim for the next 3 hours? I don't want to deal with this. This guy was like, oh, we have these great fulfilling relationships. And I just don't understand. You had to be thinking, why are you stuck at age 9 mentally? What could possibly be, you have to have some sort of traumatic damage to your brain, or something in order to find a relationship with a child fulfilling when you're an adult. A friendship, like you're not on equal footing. You're an adult. They're children. It just doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, I think you're insightful there with the word stuck, because there's no exact consensus at the moment, in the world with doctors and stuff about what makes someone a pedophile. It's all really complicated, but there is a theory of sort of getting stuck, that an 8-year-old might like an 8-year-old girl and a 9-year-old and a 9-year-old and 10 and 10, and it sort of changes as you get older. It even happens as you get into your 30s and 40s. I remember being 20 and looking at a 32-year-old woman as like, oh God, that's like my mum or something, and then you get to 32 and suddenly they look different to how they did. That's most people.
You're 40 and someone who's 32 is like, looks like a child, and you're, like not an actual child. It should be clear here. They look like they're in college. And they're like, I'm not in college, I'm 35. And then you just look in the mirror and you go, damn, I got these crow's feet creeping. I'm old now.
Well, you look fantastic, Jordan.
Yeah, it's the lighting, but thank you.
Yeah.
But this reminds me of kind of like the Michael Jackson thing, where he's literally having 10-year-olds or 11-year-olds and he's going to Disneyland with them. And it's like he's really enjoying that at this really weird level that makes everyone else completely uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's it. They get sort of, and Michael Jackson, again, you don't want to diagnose from afar, but he's the one I would go to as well. He was clearly abused. He didn't have a childhood, and he seemed to get stuck at that age. And it's a funny thing with these guys, because it's not just the sexual stuff. It's like, it seems to be something more. They want, as you were saying about this guy on my podcast, Silas, he wants to hang around with them. He wants to have friendships with them, stuff that for us would be a chore. They seem to be stuck in childhood. So they need, like I say, they need to go to therapy. They need to be disavowed of the notion that that's okay, and that it's this guy in particular, Silas. He was 18 and the head boy or class president of his high school. A position of power. It's very scary, and we have to be very careful around him, and he needs help. So at the moment, I've written a book on the subject about all these experiences. And it's just tough to find at the moment a publisher that will take it on, because it's such a taboo subject, which sort of is the point I'm trying to make, because at the moment we're doing very little to curb child abuse. And fortunately, I'm making a radio documentary about it as well. And it's just won some award called the Wickers Award or whatever. So it's going to start to get made in the coming months, because that is the aim. It's like, what is anyone doing to when it's your child, you care, and people, and it could be anyone's child. So yeah, I feel quite passionately about it as we've gone on, as I've continued.
Yeah, obviously I got triggered up in this. I mean, as a father, I just can't. I would absolutely tear this guy to shreds. And I know that look, if you haven't offended, you haven't done anything wrong. But the idea that somebody would even be a danger to society like that makes me think that risking prison would be worth it, which is not how we solve this problem. Because if I say murder all the pedophiles, no one's going to come out and say, hey, I think I have this weird mental condition. No, I'm going to get murdered by Jordan Harbinger or a bunch of other people who think the same way. And that's not going to stop kids from getting abused. So really, I'm making the problem worse when I express those kind of feelings, which is,
it
sucks.
Yeah.
By the way, when you say disavow them, do you mean, do they use that word that way in the UK? Disavow means, hey, I have nothing to do with this, but we would say disabuse them of that notion, which means like, don't let them keep thinking that. Is that, like either that's a British thing, or I've never heard that used that way, or you're misusing that word? What do you think it is? And this will cut this part out of the show.
I'm sure someone will let us know. Induce someone to disabuse. I've always said disavow. No one stopped me.
I've just never heard it used that way.
I don't mind. You don't have to cut it out either. I quite like talking about these things. It could be disabused.
Then we'll leave this in, because I would say we need to disabuse them of that notion. I've never heard anybody say disavow them of that notion.
What does disavow mean then?
It means like, so in Mission Impossible, the OG TV series from like the 80s or 90s or whatever it was, they would say, if you get caught, the secretary will disavow any knowledge of your existence, which means they just say, hey, we don't know this guy. Right. We don't know anything about him.
Someone will email
I don't know if
in.
you can. I don't know if you can disavow someone else to cause them to do something. I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
If I am wrong, I'm pleased I used it about 4 times in the space of a minute.
Minimum, yeah. Like a bunch of times to the point where we can't fix it, which is why we're leaving the grammar lesson in the show here. Anyways, yes, many people will email in. You bet your bippy on that
Yeah.
Now, look, I don't want to go on too long. I really have enjoyed this conversation with you. I enjoyed your podcast and the documentaries. I will say that I did also listen to the podcast about the guys who crashed the airplane in the Andes Mountains and then had to eat each other, which is that the exact same group that was in the movie Alive, or is it a different plane crash?
Yeah, that's
Same
them.
group.
That's them. Yeah. Yes. I mean, it's just a case of, you know, a lot of our podcasts are fairly similar. You know, there's a crossover, isn't there? We want interesting people. It's as simple as that. And I couldn't, you know, literally on the edge is the name of the podcast. I couldn't think of anything more on the edge. They were literally on the edge of a mountain for 72 days. And it was great because that was a way I could use my languages. There aren't many times in a podcast you're able to do that. And I knew that, look, these guys are getting older. If anyone knows about this, was the Andes plane crash that happened now, I think it was 40 years ago or more. And they landed on a mountain. Most of them died in the crash, but there were like 30 of them still alive. There was that movie Alive about them. And they had to eat the dead. And that was it's the most horrific thing I've ever heard. But, you know, it's a theme of mine, I guess, to go towards the darkness. And I wasn't going to shy away from that one. I mean, cannibalism, which they don't like that word because cannibalism implies it's sort of a habit or a custom, whereas this was sort of forced. They were forced to eat each other to survive.
By the way, your podcast network automatically injects advertising into the beginning and the end of the show. I'm sure you knew that. So I just wanted to let you know that during the show for people who had crashed into the Andes Mountains and been forced to eat one another, at the end of the show, there was an ad for a meat company.
Oh, no.
And they were like, I really love such and such brand, you know, ham. Oh, yeah, it's the tastiest. And I was just thinking, this is the weirdest. And I know it's an accident because I know how dynamic ad insertion works. Sure. Really, really gross. I don't remember the brand, and it's lucky for them because I would never want to associate my meat brand. And it makes me think, like, do they transcribe the show? And there's like somebody's talking about eating meat, and they're like, "Oh yeah, put a meat ad in there." They're already thinking about eating meat.
Maybe, you know, when I was living in Germany, so they all came up in German. So you know, which is strange. It's my English podcast, and then suddenly like, "Was willst du denn? Wir sind aus Deutschland, ja."
Yeah, it's geo-targeting, so it depends on the IP address that you're from. But the meat thing was a little bit on the nose, especially because I'm like, how often are there meat companies advertising on podcasts? I mean, it's not a mattress, right? It's pretty rare. I just thought it was really funny that there was a frickin' meat ad on your podcast about people having to eat one another after an airplane crash, which did remind me to ask you, and I'm surprised that you didn't ask this, or maybe you did and the answer was kind of gross. Did you ask what human flesh tasted like? Because it's dark.
It was too much. He's a 72-year-old man, and he was in his little room and stuff. And I just read his whole book, and the book is quite religious and a lot of stuff about God, and they sort of use a lot of the imagery of like eating the body of Christ as sort of I suppose you have to in that instance, sort of as a way of living with yourself, I guess, although they had no choice. There was nothing to eat there. I mean, they were in freezing cold temperatures as well, like minus a million or whatever for like 3 months. And they only had like socks. They had like no shoes on and stuff. They had never been in the snow because they were from warm climates and they were going over to Chile to play rugby. So they'd never, ever been in the snow. They were totally unprepared for that. They had to like put snow in a wine bottle and like put it in the sun for like hours and hours to get drops out of it for water because the snow like burned their mouths. So it was just horrific. But yeah, it was such an emotional ride reading this guy's book. And then to get him in front of me, this sort of slightly frail older man who's so lovely and smiley, he said to me after a little bit, like, you know what, I'm a bit tired. Can we speak in Spanish? So because we were speaking English at first. So we went to Spanish, sorry. And I had to use a translator over him. I think it still works, and it's very emotional, that episode. It's the only one I've edited, and I was crying while editing it, the bit where he gets saved. It's just the most amazing story. But yeah, it was just from the beginning I knew I'm not going to ask this guy what it tasted like. I of course it went through my mind though.
Yeah, I wondered about that because it seems like my dark curiosity wants to know. Obviously, I'm never going to do this. hopefully I'm never going to have any situation where this is something that I need to do. And I totally understand why he has to say like, oh, it's the body of Christ, although the body of Christ tastes like wafers from my experience.
Yeah.
And the blood tastes like wine. It's weird how that works. But the idea that he had to survive off of that, I mean, it might even be worse if you're religious because you feel like this is really wrong and we're not supposed to do this. Whereas me, as somebody who's not a person of faith at all, I'm kind of like, look, this dead person would totally if I died and people ate me, I'd be like, oh, good. At least I had some use after I bit the bucket or kicked the bucket, right? I don't really have any strong feelings around that. I feel more bad that you're almost lucky if you died in the beginning of that ordeal. Until, of course, they got saved, which none of them necessarily knew it was going to happen. Andrew Gold, thank you so much, man. Always a great conversation. I really do enjoy your work.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me on. It was an absolute pleasure to be here.